Space Jam!
Any question, divine?
Well, now I've seen everything.
People tend to react negatively to movies that feel like IP showrooms. When the Emoji Movie came out, many viewers and critics didn't see it as a story so much as a billboard full of apps and brands. When Space Jam: A New Legacy came out, the reaction was similar. The moment Warner Brothers filled the basketball crowd with every piece of IP it owned, people did not see it as an expansion of the Looney Tunes universe. They saw it as a studio opening its storage room and showing off the inventory. And honestly, that reaction makes sense. Because scenes built around IP nostalgia always stand on the line between fan service and advertising. And people usually do not go to the movies because they want to watch an ad. Even if you like soda, you can still laugh at the scene in World War Z where Brad Pitt spends way too much screen time drinking a Pepsi. But this is where things get interesting. Audiences say they hate IP showcases, and yet, at the same time, they can respond positively to a movie simply because an IP they love appears on screen, even when the story or characters around it are not especially convincing. So why does this happen? Maybe audiences do not hate IP showcases themselves. Maybe audiences call an IP showcase advertising when they do not love the IP, and they call it a gift when they do. And the two movies I want to talk about today stand right on that line: Ready Player One and the Super Mario Galaxy movie. These are not just movies with a lot of references. They are movies where much greater creators fall into the same trap in much more polished ways. Steven Spielberg was one of the filmmakers who understood better than anyone how to connect wonder with emotion. Shigeru Miyamoto was one of the creators who understood better than anyone how to make fun feel instantly understandable, whether you were a child or an adult. But in Ready Player One and the Super Mario Galaxy movie, the philosophies of these two masters arrive at a strange contradiction. Both films appear to be about meaningful experience. One talks about the importance of reality. The other talks about entertainment that anyone can enjoy. But the emotion these movies most often demand from the audience is very simple. Did you recognize that? And recognizing something does not mean you have learned to care about it. First, I want to be clear. There is nothing wrong with enjoying references or fan service. A familiar piece of music can be moving. A beloved character returning can be exciting. An old image repeated with new meaning can be powerful. The problem is not whether a reference exists. The problem is what that reference is doing. Does it deepen an emotion that is already there? Does it help us better understand a character's choice or relationship? Does it transform a memory from the past into something meaningful in the present story? Or is the movie borrowing emotion from an attachment the audience already had, because the film itself never built that emotion? Good fan service is a reward for the story. Bad fan service is a replacement for the story. And the two movies we are talking about today exist right on that border. When we talk about Steven Spielberg, it is not enough to say that he was good at filming spectacle. The first dinosaur reveal in Jurassic Park is not great simply because the film shows us a dinosaur. It is great because, in that moment, the characters and the audience rediscover wonder at the same time. Even in a much darker film like War of the Worlds, the same principle applies. The alien invasion is not just an excuse to destroy cities. It becomes a way of experiencing the fear of ordinary people who are attacked without even knowing why. The helplessness of a family turned into refugees overnight. The feeling that reality itself has suddenly collapsed. Spielberg's real gift was not simply showing us powerful images. It was making us understand what those images meant inside a story. And that is what makes Ready Player One such a strange film. On the surface, Ready Player One looks like a very self-aware movie. The real world in this film is broken. People are poor, the cities are collapsing, everyday life is miserable. So everyone escapes into a virtual world called the Oasis. The villain, Sorrento, and the corporation I.O. want to take over that world and turn it into a space of advertising, debt labor, and corporate control. The ending also seems clear. You cannot abandon reality completely and live only inside a virtual world. Spielberg himself described the nostalgia and references in Ready Player One as something audiences could enjoy through the side windows if they wanted to, not something that should be necessary to understand the story. He also said there is no substitute for the real world. So up to this point, Ready Player One appears to be a warning about escapism. But what does the movie actually reward its hero for? Wade Watts does not become the heir to the oasis because he understands poverty more deeply than anyone else. He does not win because he has a better vision for how to fix a broken society. He wins because he has studied the tastes and memories of one billionaire founder more intensely than everyone else. He knows which old game to play. He knows which movie scene to follow. He knows which car, song, and line of dialogue he is supposed to recognize. The movie defines the corporate monopolization and commercialization of popular culture as evil, but at the same time it turns the most faithful memorization and worship of past commercial culture into heroism. That is the contradiction of Ready Player One. This movie says reality matters. After all, Wade shuts down the oasis on certain days at the end. But the thing the movie films with the most love and excitement is not reality. It is the escape. This movie criticizes corporations for treating culture as nothing more than a product. But the greatest pleasure it offers the audience is the pleasure of recognizing and consuming countless cultural products. In the end, the film seems to say this: the person who remembers the products of the past better than anyone else deserves to inherit the future. Ready Player One is not merely a movie that uses nostalgia. It is a movie that turns loyalty to nostalgia into heroism. And that directly clashes with Spielberg's own stated belief in the importance of reality and the importance of story. This does not mean Spielberg suddenly forgot how to make movies. That is exactly why this case is interesting. The problem with Ready Player One is not the absence of talent. It is a case where the wonder and nostalgia Spielberg had always handled so well began to move ahead of the story itself. And considering that Spielberg later returned to much more personal and delicate filmmaking, Ready Player One feels less like a decline in ability and more like a great filmmaker getting caught in a specific industrial and cultural trap. But a few years later, a completely different kind of master arrived at a similar trap in a completely different way. This time, it was not 1980s pop culture. It was not virtual reality. This time, it was Mario. Shigeru Miyamoto's greatness was not built on complex world building. His greatest strength was making an experience feel immediately understandable, even to someone encountering it for the first time. Think about the first level of the original Super Mario Bros. The game does not begin with a long explanation. Mario stands on the left side of the screen. There is empty space to the right, so the player naturally moves right. Soon, a Goomba approaches. The player tries to avoid it or jump over it. Then they hit a question block. A mushroom appears. They touch it, and Mario grows bigger. You do not understand the fun by memorizing a manual. You understand the language of the game by acting, failing, and discovering. Of course, this is deeply connected to the interactive nature of video games. But it is not only that. The game itself is carefully designed to guide the player into participation. In Mario games, narrative is not mainly delivered through long dialogue or heavy exposition. It is delivered through the flow of what the player's body experiences. At first, you jump over small obstacles. Then you learn increasingly difficult jumps. And eventually, you cross spaces that once seemed impossible. That is a very simple but very clear story of growth. Completing a difficult jump becomes the narrative of a hero overcoming an obstacle. That was the universality of Mario. A child seeing Mario for the first time can enjoy it. An adult who has played the games for years can enjoy it immediately too. Miyamoto has long described his work through joy, curiosity, and accessibility. What matters is that the player should not be blocked by unnecessary knowledge or complicated rules. They should discover the fun directly through experience. This is not a philosophy that hates story. It is a philosophy that values clarity over unnecessary complexity. It is a philosophy that says fun should be understandable without homework. And that is exactly why the Super Mario Galaxy movie occupies such a strange position. This is a film attached to Miyamoto's name. On the surface, it looks like a Mario movie that anyone can enjoy. But many of the moments the film treats as special depend heavily on what the audience already knows and already loves. Again, I want to be clear. Fox appearing in a Mario movie is not automatically a problem. Mr. Game & Watch appearing is not automatically a problem. Music, planets, power-ups, enemies, and imagery from the games appearing in a Mario movie is completely natural. This is a Mario movie. The problem is what these elements are doing inside the film. There are two ways for a character appearance to work. The first is when the film builds that character's desire, conflict, and relationship clearly enough that their appearance changes the story. In that case, even if the audience has never seen the character before, they can understand why the moment matters. The second is when the movie depends on the fact that the audience already likes the character. In that case, the character's appearance feels meaningful not because of the story, but because the audience can say, "They finally showed up." The Super Mario Galaxy movie relies on the second method far too often. First example, Rosalina. Rosalina is a character that many fans of the original game feel strongly attached to. She is not just another helper. She represents much of the cosmic loneliness and fairy tale emotion that made Super Mario Galaxy special. So when Rosalina appears in the movie, fans naturally react. But the important question is this: does the movie itself make her emotional weight clear to viewers who are seeing her for the first time? Does the film show us why she matters? Does her arrival change Mario, Peach, or the central conflict of this story in a meaningful way? If the emotion of that scene is not newly created inside the film, but instead depends heavily on what fans already brought in from the game, then that is less like character building and more like emotional borrowing. The movie is not creating a new attachment. It is borrowing an attachment the game already built. Second example, Yoshi. Yoshi works in a similar way. Of course, it is exciting to see Yoshi. Yoshi is one of the most beloved characters in the Mario series, and his appearance gives the audience an immediate burst of joy. But the fact that we already like Yoshi, and the question of whether the movie builds a meaningful relationship between Mario and Yoshi, are two completely different things. If the film had turned Yoshi's appearance into the beginning of a real relationship, the audience would not stop at simply saying, "It's Yoshi." We would see how that relationship affects later choices. Without that build-up, Yoshi risks functioning not as a character, but as a product entering the screen. Yes, it is enjoyable, but enjoyment and storytelling are not the same thing. Third example, Fox and the Nintendo cameos. And when the movie starts pulling in characters from other Nintendo IP, the problem becomes even clearer. The first thing the audience feels in that moment is not the emotional weight of a character's choice. It is, wait, they put this character in here too? And yes, that reaction is fun. I understand it. As a Nintendo fan, it is hard not to react to something like that. But when a movie increasingly organizes itself around that kind of reaction, the audience's questions begin to change. At first, the question becomes, which character will appear next? But after the scene passes, the question can quickly become, wait, was that really all? If Fox appears, his appearance should change the story. He should affect Mario's choices, or push Peach and Rosalina's conflict in a new direction, or expand the world emotionally, not just commercially. Otherwise, it is not really the arrival of a character, it is the arrival of a franchise. Even if a cameo began as a joke from the filmmakers or as harmless fan service, the moment it becomes connected to related merchandise or future projects, the audience starts to read it not as a pure joke, but as a signal of franchise expansion. At that point, the important question is not who suggested the cameo first. The important question is this: did this scene strengthen the emotions of the film, or did it make the audience think about the next product outside the film? Characters stop being people inside a story. They become doors to the next piece of content. Scenes stop building emotion. They become public events designed to produce audience applause. And that moves in the opposite direction of what made Miyamoto's philosophy so powerful. Mario games were not great because they allowed us to confirm things we already knew. They were great because even a first-time player could understand the fun by moving, discovering, and participating. But this movie too often depends less on letting the audience enter the world for themselves and more on borrowing the affection they already have. Instead of creating new emotion inside the movie, it imports emotion that was already created by the games. At this point, some people might say, "It is a Mario movie for kids. Why are you demanding such a complicated story?" But I am not saying that every children's movie needs to be a complex emotional drama on the level of Pixar. I am saying almost the opposite. Mario's strength was always simplicity. But simplicity does not mean that anything goes. Good simplicity allows the audience to understand the purpose and emotion of a scene without heavy explanation. Weak simplicity skips that process and covers the empty space with names and items the audience already recognizes. I am not asking for a complicated story. I am asking for the clarity that Mario already had. A simple and clear emotional line that children, adults, fans, and non-fans can understand. That is why the red star scene matters. For Mario grabbing the red star to feel meaningful, it cannot simply matter because the star appeared in the game. If a power-up item that has not been properly prepared suddenly appears from a box at the moment of crisis and then solves the biggest threat in the story with a single attack, that is not fan service. That is a narrative shortcut. In the games, the player moves, fails, and tries again. That means obtaining an item is part of the experience. For example, the axe or switch at the end of Bowser's castle may look like a simple solution device, but the player has to reach it. The player has to jump. The player has to avoid danger. The player has to perform the final action. So it becomes the conclusion of an experience. The player's action remains inside the world. But a movie does not have that interaction. If a power-up item is going to resolve a crisis in a film, it cannot simply appear. The movie has to persuade us why that item appears now. It has to connect that choice to the character's emotion or growth. Otherwise, the scene is not translating the fun of the game into cinema. It is pasting a game icon onto a movie. That difference matters. Mario games were simple, but their simplicity was designed so that players could understand it directly. If a film uses simplicity as an excuse to skip build-up and persuasion, then that is not Miyamoto-style clarity. It is just thin storytelling. Now let's return to the question from the opening. Why do people react cynically to the IP showcase in Space Jam 2 while being much more forgiving toward the Nintendo references in a Mario movie? The difference is attachment. The IP showcase in Space Jam 2 looked, to many viewers, like a corporate storage room. Characters from completely different worlds appeared in the same place, but it did not feel like they were creating one story. It felt like Warner Bros. Was showing us its property list. But the IP showcase in a Mario movie can feel, to many fans, like a childhood world expanding. When Yoshi appears, when Rosalina appears, when another Nintendo character enters the frame, it may not feel like advertising. It can feel like a celebration. So the same commercial strategy can be read in two completely different ways. One feels like an ad, the other feels like a gift. But that is exactly what makes the second version more dangerous. An ad that looks like an ad is easy to criticize. We can point at it and say, "This is too obvious." But an ad that feels like a gift has already made us like it before we begin to question it. That does not mean the fans' feelings are fake. Being happy to see a character you love is completely natural. I react that way too. The problem is whether that happiness was created by the film itself, or whether the film borrowed an attachment the audience had before entering the theater. And many moments in the Super Mario Galaxy movie become unstable in front of that question. Is this movie creating new emotion for us, or is it showing us things we already loved, and then letting us mistake that love for emotion the movie earned? That is why I think Ready Player One and the Super Mario Galaxy movie belong in the same conversation. Of course, they are not the same film. and their problems are not identical. Spielberg's contradiction is thematic. He makes a movie that says the real world matters, while handing the future to the person who most faithfully worships past commercial pop culture. Miyamoto's contradiction is experiential. He represents a tradition of play built on immediate, universal understanding, while the film made under his creative authority gives its greatest rewards to viewers who already know Nintendo history. Of course, Miyamoto is not the sole screenwriter or director of the movie, so this problem cannot be blamed on one person alone. But if his name and philosophy are deeply connected to the film's production authority and promotion, then we can compare the movie to the creative philosophy Mario has long represented. Ready Player One says, "You cannot live only through escape. Reality matters too." But the thing the movie films with the most love and excitement is the escape itself. The Super Mario Galaxy movie says, "This is an adventure for children and adults, for fans and non-fans alike." But the moments the film treats as most special are too often the ones that fans recognize first. One movie talks about reality while surrendering to nostalgia. The other talks about universal fun while depending on prior fan knowledge. And both films fall into the same illusion. They assume that if the audience recognizes something, they have already been moved by it. But recognition is only cognition. It is not emotion. Familiarity can be proof of attachment, but it is not proof that a film has created new emotion. What makes all of this more disappointing is that Spielberg and Miyamoto were not originally creators like this. Spielberg did not become a great filmmaker by listing icons the audience already recognized. He became great by placing the loneliness of an ordinary child, the fear of an ordinary family, and the wonder of encountering the impossible inside unforgettable images. Miyamoto did not become a great game designer by endlessly displaying characters and lore. He became great by designing experiences that allowed even first-time players to move, fail, laugh, and try again without needing a long explanation. Both creators were extraordinary at creating new emotions in the moment, rather than demanding that the audience or player arrive with old memories already prepared. That is why the problem with these two movies is not simply that they contain a lot of fan service. The problem is that they trust fan service too easily. They assume that if they show us a character we already loved, the emotion inside the movie will automatically be complete. They assume that if they name something we used to enjoy, the story we are watching now will automatically feel important. But that is not how it works. A good reference can make emotion stronger. A good homage can deepen the meaning of a story. The return of a beloved character can turn a scene into something unforgettable. But that only works when the movie has first made us feel something. Homage can be a reward for emotion. It cannot replace emotion. A cameo can expand a world. It cannot fill an empty story. And a list of things we already loved is not, by itself, a new story worth loving. The greatest disappointment of Ready Player One and the Super Mario Galaxy movie is not that they love the past. It is that they do not fully trust their present stories to hold the audience without that past. Because recognizing something does not mean you have learned to care about it. References should reward emotion, not replace it.